The quickest way for me, most important way to do that is to roll ahead to my first couple of years out of law school, where I met many individuals with primarily developmental disabilities, many parents, and I want to say that because they, in addition to meeting people and the stereotypes falling away, that we have more in common together than we have differences. I also was taught so much by these individuals, and I'm sure that had some role then when I started prosecuting at a law school, sex crimes, domestic abuse crimes. Competency was never an issue of either children with me or individuals with a variety of developmental disabilities. And so, because I had seen that all too often, that was used as an excuse to not to file a lawsuit, to not to prosecute a crime. I didn't have one case, and I actually did have the first case to go to the Minnesota Supreme Court, thanks to a very courageous state trial judge, on how to explain competency to juries with an expert witness, and children who've been victims of sex crimes, because the people want to dismiss people as well. They don't think, they don't remember, they don't recall, they can't express themselves. All untrue. It's more the inability of people like me to communicate. That's the first place that I saw it, and how I got educated, just by luck of the draw, I would say, rather than misfortune. I said fortune. My first job out of law school was doing mental health commitments and placements as a lawyer for St. Louis County, and in that role, I ended up being placed on the Developmental Achievement Board in Eveleth, Minnesota, and then the Rains Mental Health Center, and I got all sorts of education about this is how you treat people and you who have disabilities. And so, because I used to see it in the courtrooms day in and day out, and that was my first exposure, other than growing up as a child and hearing the ridicules of people before mainstreaming and making fun of children that were in special ed classes. And I'm just very thankful I was raised that is not tolerated. So, but that was my first exposure before I became a judge, was prosecuting a lot of those cases. And again, I credit advocates for children and adults with disabilities. I think they watched for young lawyers coming out of law school to say, I think he's trainable. I think we can train this guy and teach him something. Perhaps we can. They're the ones that really taught me, because I don't consider myself an expert, and I also got taught by many of the people with disabilities I worked with, who taught me and showed me who they were. So but it's that inability to believe, and then of course I came out of law school at a time when, with these major local and U.S. Supreme Court decisions, the phrase, you have a right to live in the least restrictive alternative, you just don't take individuals regardless of their disability and lock them in a state hospital, drug them up, or restrain them down, and that's not living, that's not humanity. And so all of these things were happening in the 70s when I came out of law school. You know, I think I've referred to individual disabilities as the forgotten minority. You know, people, and what I think it is, it's as they finally get the promise that the Constitution makes for all citizens in this country, of equal opportunities and equal justice, equal access. Living in the community, working, like in this building, I work with individuals who maintain the building. you don't live and work with people with disabilities without those stereotypes falling away. And so I think getting challenged, one of the first things we did, and I give at least two people, Colleen Wick and Seamus Samir, credit, we did a presentation to the Federal Bar Association saying, as we talk about unrepresented minorities, the largest group, in our opinion, are people with disabilities. It's time to educate the local bar, which is in, we've done actually 2 seminars, and there'll be more, to train people to say, well, we've forgotten about these individuals, and the representation isn't as difficult as you might think if you educate yourself. And so I think challenging the system, those traditional stereotypes that are so contrary to reality and so damaging to individuals, especially with disabilities, much like stereotyping of people of color, and most especially African Americans were during the Civil Rights Movement. Those are the changes being made, but who are we being challenged by? It's the individual disabilities and their parents and friends and loved ones. It's advocates, lawyers, non-lawyers. Because make no mistake about it, it isn't the intellectuals. It's not the judges. I take an oath. I'm just trying to keep my promise and follow my oath. But it's these individuals who are saying, we're not going to tolerate this anymore, and they're educating us. So I think that's, I don't want to be oversimplistic about it, and we've got a ways to go, but that's what's changed, I think. Well, a couple of, in my own opinion, again, it's the, and again, I don't speak as an expert. I'll talk mostly about the people that I know. And in the employment area, for example, let me just take a couple of employers in downtown St. Paul. Let's take our courthouse. We have 22 individuals that work in this building. Virtually all of them, with maybe the exception of 1 or 2, have some type of developmental disability. Well, how many people think, even when we'll talk about their opportunity to be hired here, how many people think of, well, if you cut back money for transportation, public transportation, to cut back on public transportation is to destroy someone's livelihood or work, because everybody can't afford to own a car, everybody can't drive a car, and if you take away whether it's a transportation program or public transportation generally, those are things that now the disability community is putting on our radar to say, well, you know, we have to look at, isn't our responsibility to give everybody equal opportunities and equal access, and how do you do that if there's no public transportation and all these government programs are cut? Giving people a chance to work and properly train them. When I first started here in this building in 1998, I kind of out of ignorance would, if I had a complaint about something happening in the building, this is not unique to the disability community. It seems like the people that get the blame for things, it's not the hierarchy, it travels down the ladder. And so I finally had to start going to supervisors saying, we love working with the individuals here, and we think all of our individuals that are hired should be, they should be individuals with disabilities, because they're fully capable of doing the work, but they're like everybody else if you don't train them and tell them what the responsibilities are, and that really was the problem. Well, there are a lot of progressive employers who understand that maybe our courthouse or private or public employer should look like they represent the people that live in the community. That means not just race issues, but people with disabilities, other individuals. It isn't that they can't do the work, it's that they're not given the opportunity to do the work. And it's the full package. It's accommodating the hours with making sure there's public transportation, there is proper training. I won't name the company because somebody think it would be an endorsement, but there's a private corporation here in downtown St. Paul, and I think there's a disability group, LifeWorks, and there's others. Well, this company hired 3 severely autistic young men and women, and the first thing they did in the first 2 weeks is brought in trainers to say, let's educate you, since your employer's willing to hire and do the right thing here, let's educate you on this condition so you don't do something out of ignorance or unintentionally. Well, I know a couple of people who work at this organization. They're saying there's never been more work done in this area, and instead of not getting the work done, these 3 individuals at different times are coming to their desks and saying, we're done. You must have more work for us to do. Well, that took just education. You know, they do the work just fine. There's no impairment there. They're educated. They're doing the work just fine. But it's the opportunity, and it's the stereotypes fall away. And we have a long ways to go, but we're much further today. I maintain that much of it's happening because state hospitals have been closed. Because many of the laws that were passed did not mandate that regardless of the nature or degree of one's disability, they're entitled to any job they want. It's you pursue, they have the same opportunities based upon their skills, and they just ask to be given a fair chance like each of us do and drop off those stereotypes, and they will be hired. I mean, I see it every day. But I think those are the inroads. It's mostly education and getting to know individuals, and the stereotypes fall away. For most, not all. Well, and I've been introduced to many self-advocates, and I think I can say this without, you'll probably detect a little emotion in my voice. One of the things that I do is, because this is the most kind of a profound example I can give, first, I want to say on the self-advocacy, I don't know, I suspect its origins are from the individual disabilities themselves and their friends, loved ones, and family, but it's to know and walk with our fellow human beings and citizens, and then to have them advocating on their own behalf. It really demands, no matter what somebody's predisposition is, all the stereotypes, the preconceived notions, the bias, the prejudice, it all falls away. The best example I can give is I have had the privilege of having, not just speaking at a couple of self-advocates get-togethers, but they've visited here in the courthouse, and I have met with a number of them at a number of the facilities where they work and live. And I would say that I'll just take the most recent visit a few months ago here at the building. One of the questions I ask college students, I ask high school students, and this day I ask the self-advocates, what are the most important rights to you? What's most important under the Constitution? I think that's almost word for word what I asked. Now, I am quite certain that before they came here, they hadn't read the Universal Declaration of Humanity, human rights that's in effect worldwide. But what they each said is each hand went up without any reservations. It's as if they knew more than all the rest of us because of what's here. The first hand went up. I want to be treated with respect. The next hand went up. I want to be believed as a sexual assault victim and victim of a crime. The next hand went up. I want to live on my own. The next hand went up. I want to be treated with kindness and without bias. I mean, over and over, they gave more intelligent answers as if they were familiar with the Constitution and some of these, the International Declaration of Human Rights, they gave more intelligent answers than, no offense, than 90% of the student groups we bring in here, whether they're college students, high school students, because they've walked the walk. I haven't walked the walk. And so I still, and if you would have seen some of my staff, there was a tear or two coming down because they said, you know, we think we get it, but we really don't. I mean, these are these teaching moments, and actually, I am so glad in this profile we're going to be doing of me nationally, they chose to leave that experience I had in, because it really has affected me. Just when I think I've kind of understood and been taught, and I've been taught plenty by all these individuals, the self-advocacy, as they went around the room, I'm saying, who could ask for a better advocate than that? Because, and I can't capture it, because to capture it, it just isn't the words. It's a commitment, it's the passion. But however this came up with this self-advocacy, they are making the rest of us pay attention. They're educating us. It's just like the day that I invited a group, and I have a picture of my chambers here. We had been inviting all these student groups. I've told the story a number of times. I called my friend, who's no longer living now, this was years ago, the director of special education for the northern St. Louis County. I said, why is it all these groups of citizens come in to visit the courthouse, and we give tours, we talk about rights and justice, never see people with disabilities or special education students? I should have known him well enough to know that that's all it would take for the next few months. I had every special education group of students in my courtroom. I don't think we missed one school district in all of northern St. Louis County. Then one day I get a call from a group of social workers and parents saying, well, you know, we've heard about what's going on at the courthouse, but there's a whole group that's been forgotten here through nobody's fault, perhaps. Adults with developmental disabilities. They've never been invited to your courthouse. So we came one day, and I have a picture of them because it was such a special day for me. And the first thing that happens is, again, these assumptions, these stereotypes, just because we communicate differently, that people don't understand, and they track the information the same as everyone else. In almost all cases, they do. So a young woman, probably I call it young now because I'll be 60 next year, but a young woman raises her hand in her 30s and said, well, you've talked about equal justice. I'm someone that I have a disability. Does it mean that I get the same rights as the wife of the President of the United States in the White House? And I turned to her and said, that's exactly what it means. Well, then on kind of a sad but very moving moment, and this is something that gets a lot of, I think is getting more publicity, thankfully, today. At the end of our tour and interview, the social worker comes up to me privately and said, we have 3 women, all with disabilities here in your group, and they've been sexually harassed, sexually abused. One has been raped. They're getting no help from law enforcement or anyone else. Would you talk to them? And truthfully, until that moment, even though I dealt with competency issues, I had never really thought about the fact that, as it turns out, nearly 85% of all women with developmental disabilities will be sexually harassed or abused during their lifetime. Well, there's some projects underway. In fact, again, thanks to, I would have to say, because I don't want to leave the impression that suddenly people like me and other lawyers in the state and federal system have somehow suddenly gotten enlightened. We've been trained by the disability justice community, the self-advocates. the people who are in these, and she'll chastise when we're done. Colleen Wick takes no credit for anything, but people like her, and there's on the unsung heroes and heroines, I would say, they have not let us get off the hook. They are respectful about it. They get these things in front of us, and they don't go away. And they say, "What are you doing about this? Does your walk follow the talk?" And they always do it in an appropriate way. Well, because of them, not because of any enlightenment that I came up on my own one morning. They've gone to county attorneys. Well, there's a small group of us who are going to make a presentation later this year in a statewide seminar to all prosecutors on competency issues as it relates to the not stereotyping and the failure to prosecute and investigate, because it's just not prosecutors, it's police, it's other people like that, law enforcement, with no ill intentions, but the effect on the victim of the crime is the same. We're going to be doing some training and a CLE, Canadian Legal Education, on competency issues as it affects the inability to prosecute, a refusal to investigate and prosecute, and one person who's making sure it's happening because he's been influencing this disability, just from Jim Backstrom, who's been the contact with me and others. So a group of us are going to go. Lots of things like that are happening that weren't on anyone's radar less than just, I think, a few years ago. You remind me and you teach me what my oath of office means about equal justice, and you make me a better person. Because we need reminders like that. Well, let's just tell you the journey we've been on. Let's tell you about what we believe and what's important to us. And you are not with people and individuals like this without walking away. I get re-energized every time, and I wish I could say that with everybody else I know. But no offense, but if you haven't met either of these individuals, you are going to be. It'll be a good time. Well, I'm optimistic, both for a couple of reasons. One, I have seen the EEOC take a much more aggressive and a positive way role, and I've seen, for example, civil divisions of our local U.S. Attorney's Office. That's why they're all involved, and we talk about going out and speaking to the community. They've been going with me, so the head of that, I don't know if it happened in other parts of the country, but it didn't happen it didn't happen a few years ago. More importantly, I think that even than that, with the changes, as the stereotypes fall, and they fall when people are working in the community, they're working in a building like this, they are living in the community. You don't work and live and participate in serious things, fun things with individuals with disabilities without learning something. And when that happens and the stereotypes fall away, equal opportunity increases, and maybe finally we're closer, we're not there yet, to that promise that the Constitution gives everybody of equal justice, equal opportunity. And there's still a lot of discrimination and bias, and I think people have to understand, I'm not talking about pointing a finger at someone and saying you intentionally discriminated. That goes on, but much, much less. It's acting on stereotypes and assumptions about individual disabilities, and to meet individuals and to have them working and living with us as all citizens have a right to do, and they have been for too many years, a forgotten minority. they are the best advocates for themselves. And so I'm optimistic as I sit here today, I can look you straight in the face and say I think we've come a long way. We've got a ways to go, but I'd say it's mostly because of the disability justice community and those individual disabilities. They do not let us live each day in ignorance of, and they're their own best advocates. And when that happens, and it's been happening, changes are made. I would just tell you that is the reason why is we're soon to have what's called a Minority Bar Summit. I happen to be president of the Federal Bar Association this year, and one of my best friends, he is my best friend, Chief Judge Michael Davis of the Federal Court, we're having what's called a Pro Se Bar Summit. And as we speak, there is a 1-hour seminar being put together to train all these lawyers on disability discrimination. And we're saying, you've all heard about race discrimination, other types of discrimination. We're here to educate you and train you. And please don't use the word diversity anymore. I'm repeating what I have been told without using the word disability discrimination. And that is going to be a central piece of this summit. We're bringing all state pro bono areas, referral services, federal. We're all coming together, and that's going to be a centerpiece of that. Because, for example, who do you call if you're an individual that's poor, and if you have a disability or you're in another minority group? Who do you call if you're being discriminated against? Well, since you raised the issue of the future, let's talk about. And if I may say something, and I'm saying this irrespective of political parties and so forth, because as a sitting judge, I can't talk politics, and I don't think this is. If it's politics, it's not party politics. It's the parties will have to come to terms with it as government agencies will. But unfortunately, the disability community, as I'll use that phrase in a very respectful way, they're vulnerable to the same thing in difficult economic times and non-mandated services as other minority groups. Is sometimes those non-mandated services are the first ones to get cut. Health care. Dental care. There's a long waiting list of people, individual disabilities, who the law gives them the privilege and the right to live on their own in independent living or a much less restrictive form of supervised living. People are on a waiting list because of processing. So I still will remain optimistic, but I do worry about some of the budget, because public transportation, I mentioned earlier, that disproportionately affects individuals with disabilities, and that has to be on people's radar screen because it just isn't depriving someone of a ride, it's depriving someone of a job, which is depriving someone of being a productive member of the community when they have all the skills to be. And so I do worry about that piece, because I've watched, and it just isn't, it's services for there's a lot of different people who get affected, just not those with disabilities. People, chemical dependency services, people for those. Though there's a number of areas where those non-mandated services get cut. So why do I remain optimistic? Because of self-advocates, because of training and education, of reaching people like me and others who have a responsibility. To, as we all do, to lend a caring and responsible hand. Well, the first webcast was done a few months ago on disability discrimination, and more are going to follow. 2 law schools now, there was one now, there's 2 they have disability law societies. That wasn't even being discussed 2 years ago.